follows is not a review or even a proper critical evaluation of Friday the 13th, the final chapter. Instead, I'll try to peel back the storytelling mechanics and explain why this pseudo-concluding entry in the franchise still haunts us. The title of the third sequel to Sean S. Cunningham's mold-making Friday the 13th was a cynical marketing ploy long before the decision was made to continue the series past the death of Jason Voorhees. Promoting the new film as the final chapter suggests that a plan was in place all along and that the preceding films all form a direct path to this predetermined conclusion. That, of course, was never the case. Had Frank Mancuso Jr.'s initial gambit proved a poor bet and the original film had flopped at the box office, there never would have been a sequel or a franchise, and no story would have been left untold. Each new Friday owes its existence to the success of the previous film, at first in box office dollars, but increasingly in what Hollywood refers to as the afterlife: video sales, broadcast licensing, and marketing. In 1984, it was already obvious that the series was hugely lucrative. The final chapter, both in title and intent, is a lie. There had never been a plan to reach 4 films, and as long as the money kept rolling in, there was never a plan to end it there. All of that is to say this: Friday the 13th final chapter should have been an atrocious, bare-bones, audience-demanding cash-in. It had a built-in audience to exploit, a gimmick to rival its 3D predecessor, and absolutely nothing to lose. It was, after all, calling itself the last entry in the series. In theory, disappointing the core audience wouldn't hurt future sales since there wouldn't be any. Paramount didn't care about this series. The producers thought of it as no more than a product. This film, to paraphrase a man on a bicycle, should have been doomed. Unforeseeable, then, that the final chapter is the strongest sequel of the entire library. Given that Part 3 was unable to maintain the structure of the earlier films, the final chapter breaks away from the established formula for perspective. The events of the film are not the nightmare recollection of a final girl. Important here because this will also serve to be the first film in the series that leaves both a male and female standing at the end. Understanding the storytelling perspective is crucial to grasping why this film succeeds where the previous feature failed. Part 3's narrative was fractured and inconsistent, mostly because the film's protagonist and audience surrogate was horribly underdeveloped. The film opens with Paul Holt's campfire story. The choice to replay this scene, mixed with flashes of all 3 previous Fridays, is telling. We know what happened to these characters. The urban legend is no longer being told to the other camp counselors in training. The story is being directed to us. The audience. Us. In the final chapter, we, the moviegoer, provide the narrative perspective. Each of the previous films featured an obvious dream coda that featured the return of a dead character, young Jason, Muffin, Mrs. Voorhees. Here, the film begins with an image of Jason lying on his side, axe buried in his head. Up to this point in the series, Jason has displayed absolutely no abnormal or superhuman abilities. No super strength, no regeneration, and certainly no resurrection. It could be argued, I suppose, that the machete to the shoulder wound in Part 2 is forgotten, but we're never asked to believe it miraculously healed. How then to take Jason's awakening in the corner freezer after what could only be a fatal blow? The entirety of the final chapter takes place inside the hazy nightmare logic of the chair jumper ending. Like the original, the final chapter relies on ambiguity, visual and dialogue repetition, and unstable association as a structural base. For example, in the opening moments, Coroner Axel and Nurse Morgan essentially recreate Barry and Claudette's coupling before the presence of Jason's body kills the mood. Dejected, Axel turns to a vaguely sexual aerobics show on television for relief. Jason, reborn, murders him in spectacular fashion, not just sawing through his neck with a bone saw, but also twisting the head around 90 degrees, forcing his attention away from the gyrating spandex-clad exercise instructor. Later, Teddy, no relation to Ted or Ned, would suffer a similar fate, impaled through a movie screen on which he'd watched stag porno movies. See how dangerous it is to watch this morally reprehensible stuff? Suddenly it's obvious that Jason isn't just shredding through the characters on screen, but the audience watching the film as well. The third Friday tried to break the fourth wall by projecting pointy objects off the screen. This one channels its fury directly at the audience, who love it. The sexual violence doesn't end there. The film offers up regular moments of titillation and follows them with absurdly vicious murder sequences. Skinny dipping college kids? A spear gun to the crotch. A midnight nude swim? Scorned lover impaled in a raft. The nerd lands the hot twin? A corkscrew through the hand and a cleaver in the face. Even something as tame as an attractive girl in a weather-soaked shirt leads invariably to the sharp ends of a pitchfork. Sex doesn't equal death. That's too simple. The sex doesn't kill them. We, as viewers, did. Our voyeurism guarantees their death. Need proof? In any other Friday, nubile but innocent Sarah would have been handpicked by the audience from the outset as the final girl. She's sweet and cute, but too shy to skinny dip with the others. Her flirtation with Doug has a naive charm, and it seems in line with Alice's gentle attraction to Bill or Ginny and Paul's relationship. But it's not to be. In this film, perhaps because we find ourselves drawn to her, the filmmakers chose to have her give in to passion. In a shower, no less. She's doomed at that moment, of course, but it's still shocking when she's dispatched by an axe through a closed door. Dialogue plays a major role in the underlying thematics, as the screenplay introduces coded ideas inside seemingly inane conversations. When Teddy chastises Jimmy for allowing his relationship with BJ Betty to end, the film is actually setting up a seemingly random violent set piece that follows almost immediately. The college kids pass an overweight teenager offering free love, but choose to ridicule her. She responds by flipping over her sign. It now reads, "Fuck you." Notice how the pantomime scene plays out identical to the Silent Stag films Teddy watches later on. The hitchhiker sits down and begins to eat a banana, the most phallic food there is. She may not be BJ Betty, but she's certainly acting the part. That she's killed with a knife to the throat should be telling enough, but the scene goes on to feature a close-up of the fruit withering in her hand. Subtle. The previous 3 Fridays featured final girls who, while not virginal in a strict sense, maintained a more reserved sexual profile. Alice hesitates when she loses her shirt in Strip Monopoly. Actually, I hadn't made up my mind. Ginny partially rebuffs Paul. Beware of bears. Chris literally and figuratively pushes Rick away from each of his physical advances. While Trish does very lightly flirt with Rob, there's a noticeable lack of sexual tension in their interactions. She's never in danger of falling in love or in bed with him. Her main relationship is with her brother Tommy, which by its nature is asexual. In short, Trish and Tommy break the chain. Their status as brother and sister, a platonic relationship, not totally dissimilar to mother and son, Mrs. Voorhees and Jason, allows them to survive. One other scene is crucial to the film's structure. Young Tommy spies through his bedroom window at Samantha and Paul locked in a partially clothed embrace. Denied the full show when his mother discovers the scene and lowers the shade, Tommy is at that moment an embodiment of the audience. We're not shown the intimate details of the lovemaking that surely follow, either. In Friday the 13th Final Chapter, that kind of built-up tension and frustration has very, very serious consequences. At the end, with Jason dead, again, this time with a machete, not an axe, deep in his head, Tommy and Trish reunite in a poorly lit hospital room. Unlike the previous Fridays, there's no narrative reveal. There's no peek behind a curtain. Neither Tommy nor Trish awaken from a nightmare. In fact, it's just the opposite. The very last images of Tommy opening his eyes, even wider. The screen fades to white for the very last time in the series. And the final chapter leaves it up to us if we want the nightmare to end. We all know what choice we made. Tune in to the next installment where I lose whatever remaining friends I have.